Welcome to This Week in Local, a Localogy podcast featuring lively conversations about the local digital ecosystem, hosted by Localogy analysts Mike Bolin and Charles Laughlin.
Hello, and welcome to This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin, Senior Analyst at Localogy. On today's show, we're sharing an interview with David Shim, the co-founder and CEO of ReadAI. This interview took place on stage at Localogy's recent L24 conference in Arlington, Texas. David is a celebrated entrepreneur in local, having started Placed, which was eventually acquired by Foursquare. David led Foursquare for a time as its CEO. Today, David is at the heart of two important spaces, the future of work and AI, with his startup ReadAI. Read recently raised $21 million to apply AI to online meetings and make them better. Our conversation with David on the L24 stage covers the evolution of startup life, why the time is right for ReadAI, and how he would advise younger entrepreneurs today. It's a great conversation with a compelling entrepreneur, and we know you will enjoy it. Please join me in welcoming David Shim. David, have a seat right here.
All right. Thank you.
All right, so I've got all these notes, and I'm not going to look at them. I'm just going to ask you questions about what's going on. So here's an easy one to start with. Tell us about the businesses you've started that people in this audience are likely to know.
I started a company back in 2011 called Placed. We did location analytics. We measured where people went in the physical world, map it back to store visits. Where the use case was for attribution. So that was saying, Spotify, you heard an ad for McDonald's. Did you actually go to McDonald's? We sold that for about $200 million back in 2017 to Snapchat. In 2019, we spun it out of Snapchat into Foursquare. Foursquare, I was there for about 3 or 4 months, and then I became CEO. Was there until the end of 2020. Took a little break, and then I started a company called ReadAI.
So what does an entrepreneur like you do during that little break? You climb a mountain? What did you do?
I went to the beach a lot. I went to Mexico.
Surfing? Are you a surfer?
I tried.
Yeah, I still haven't even tried.
I had a guy pushing me from behind.
That's not surfing. Bad. That's something else. I'm not sure what it is.
But no, I was in Cabo a lot, did a lot of calls, and that's kind of what drove me to Read was just being on nonstop Zoom.
We're going to get to Read in a minute, but I want to touch on a couple of things. I talk to a lot of entrepreneurs, and I'm always curious, what is the first business they started? And if it's a lemonade stand, that's okay. Just make it quick.
Short version is I used to buy candy at the corner store, and a lot of people have this.
That's close to a lemonade stand.
Yeah, pretty much. I bought candy at the corner store,
Okay.
Bought it for 5 cents, 10 cents, went to school, sold it for 25 cents to 50 cents.
Okay.
Just kind of spun that up.
So you are that's in your DNA.
It's in my DNA. My parents own a grocery store. They ended up going to Costco every weekend, helped them out. They would buy the 24 packs of Diet Coke for $4, and they would mark it up to like $10 with each individual can, and saw that, and I was like, hey, why don't I do this for candy?
People are still doing that.
No, they are, absolutely.
All right, okay, so let's advance forward a little bit. You're doing a startup now called ReadAI. The extension AI says a lot. We'll get to that. But I want to talk about kind of how it's changed. The startup life has changed. Forget the, going to the beach, 200 million exits, et cetera. But just the process of starting a company from your first one to the latest one, what have you seen evolve? And let's leave AI out of it for the moment. We'll get to that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot more expensive. So when I started Placed in 2011, we raised a $300,000 seed round. With that $300,000 seed round, I was able to actually get about 4 to 5 engineers to come on board to build the product out. And we worked on it for about 6 months until we raised our Series A, which was $3 million. But the fact that you could get 5 to 6 engineers coming on board for $300,000 for 6 months, that's almost impossible to do now.
That leads to a follow-up that's going to advance this conversation by almost to the end, which is how AI changed what you just said. Yeah. Maybe we'll just put a pause on it. Put a pin in that question, because I think that's a pertinent question. Okay, so it's more expensive. What else?
It's more expensive. It is easier to get capital. So to give you an idea, I did have an exit on
more money. It costs more money, but it's easier to get money.
It's easier to get money because there's more venture capital out in the space. There's more investors willing to go earlier stage to pay that premium. So in 2021 with Read, we raised a $10 million seed round. So going from $300,000 to $10 million in a 10-year period, that's a big jump.
Has it gotten that much more expensive? Is the 300 like equivalent to the 10 million now, or?
It's not equivalent, but
I mean, you know.
Yeah. I think the thing was like having the exit under the belt, but also they want you to move a lot faster. In the old days, they would invest in a startup and say, hey, you've got 3, 4, 5 years to work this thing out, grow the business. Now it's like, hey.
We want to be out in 3 to 5 years.
No, not necessarily that, but they want like product market fit in the first year or two. And if you don't get product market fit right away, they're going to go in and say, why would I invest in this? Why
What
don't you
does
start
right
the
away
next
mean?
thing?
Is that like 6 months, a year?
About a year or two, like max. And product market could be as early as like, hey, get me 100 customers. It doesn't have to be a lot of
'Cause
revenue.
I was going to say, what does that actually mean? Because that's a term people use all the time.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's very well defined.
No,
What's your definition of product market fit?
I think product market fit is where you don't have to convince people to buy it, but they find value in it on its own.
Okay. So the market comes to you, sort of.
Some way. You might have to advertise like events like this, but generally when people see the product, when they try it, they're like, okay, this makes sense, and they'll start to tell other folks, or they'll just go in and spend more money naturally. I think that's what happened at Place, where I don't know if Monica's here, but Monica, Monica Ho used to work at a company called XAD, and XAD actually did they did media, and she came to me and said like, hey, you guys do attribution really well. Can you intersect ads with attribution and make this work? And we did it once. They liked it. But then other people saw it and they started to say, hey, can we do business with you? Can we do business with you? And so that was product market fit because we had no salespeople. We had one example, and that ultimately grew where we had 0 sellers. We got to, I think, like, what was it? Almost 10 million in revenue with no official seller on the team.
Okay. All right. So let's kind of move into what you're doing now, which kind of, Mike Bolin and I, we do a podcast, and we've kind of talked about this constellation of companies that has emerged in the sort of, I hate to say post-COVID, it's kind of cringy at this point, but let's be honest, there is a divider between pre and post in terms of companies that have formed, how business has changed. This constellation of companies that are building around this notion of what is work now, you know. And we use the term remote tech. We've, I think, kicked around a few other terms, but I don't know if there's a good name for this, but that's the one we're using. And we consider your company within that sort of broader bucket. And let's talk about what you saw. I mean, I need to start a company that's solving for how work is changing, and why you chose to do that, and why you thought AI is the way to do it. Just kind of talk about that.
Yeah, I think I was on a call in Cabo during my break.
Was this after the guy was pushing you on the
That's where I was surfing my surfboard all the way.
Okay.
And I was on a call, and there was about 20 people on the call, and I started to get bored. Because within about 5 minutes, anyone here, you're like, I shouldn't be on this Zoom call. This is a waste of time. But if I leave, someone's going to notice, and it's going to make me look really bad and look like an asshole.
There's a blank square, or there's no missing square, or whatever it is. Yeah.
And so with that in mind, I was like, okay, I got to stick on this call for another 30 minutes. So I started looking at people's faces because I was bored. And I was like, this person's not paying attention. This person's not paying attention. This person's in ghost mode because they don't have their camera on, their mic is on mute, and they haven't said anything.
And it's like a social media photo?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And so I started going there. I was like, okay, this is kind of interesting. If I can visually tell that people aren't paying attention, can computer models actually visually tell people aren't paying attention? And so I started to dive in a bit more into the papers and say, and this was about 2021, early 2021, and there were a bunch of papers like, hey, when people eat food, when they watch a movie, you've got a high fidelity camera in front of them, you can see their reactions. But no one had actually applied it to streaming video that is also video conferencing. And so we started to test out those models, and it started to go in and say, oh, you actually can tell when someone is or isn't paying attention. And there's like false positives, like if I keep looking over here, but then I go back here when I talk, that's your second screen. So we could actually go in and say, we've got a model that says you go to a fixed position and then you come back, you're still paying attention, versus if you're scanning your head around like this, you're not paying attention, you're just kind of distracted.
Okay. All right, so that was the insight. What was the next step with that? Reading these papers, you're reading these papers, learning this stuff. What did you do next?
Yeah, so what I did next was, I know Eric Yuan barely, and so he's the CEO of Zoom, and I pinged him and I just said like, hey, this is David. We met this one time. Do you remember me? And he's like, yeah, I remember you. What do you want?
Was he lying?
No, he's a super nice guy.
Okay.
Super nice guy. Incredibly nice guy. And so he comes in and he says, I ask him like, hey, quick question. This is what I'm thinking. Do you have an attention metric for meetings And he's like, no, we don't. We were going to build this before COVID hit. You should work on this. So that was the clear sign to go in and say, okay, they're not going into the space because he's saying, go work on this
What do you
problem.
actually infer from that statement?
If he said, don't do it, he's either working on it
Okay.
or he thinks it's a dumb idea. It's one of the two.
Okay.
And if he's working on it, it's like, okay, is he going to roll out a feature a week after I do that? And I think there's been companies in this space where they've launched like large language models. Before OpenAI came out, there were other large language models. There were companies building proprietary models, and those models just fell on their face because OpenAI said like, hey, anyone can come in, use this. We're going to charge you 25 cents for each page that you want us to process, and we're good to go. And so it blew those businesses out. So for me, it was really important to go in and say, let me find a space that they're not going into.
Okay, so you took from that he's not building there.
Yep.
He gave you a green light to build. It wasn't, you didn't take that as a signal that he was going to partner with you, or
No,
anything
no,
like-
no.
Okay,
Didn't take any of that. He was very nice to make some introductions. We were able to have some conversations, which led to being us a Zoom Essential Apps partner. So we were one of the first apps in their app store. They highlighted us to about 10 million people. So he did very much kind of push us in the right direction.
Okay.
But that was good confirmation. And then we started to go in and say, okay, is it possible to do technically? Can you actually build a feed of audio and video, process it in real time, and give back analytics? And we're able to do that. And that was our version 1, was this real-time analytics dashboard. You'll see this in the elections, not from us. But if you watch CNN, Fox, whatever show
the
you watch.
dials?
The dials, and it shows like the ticks going up and down. We were doing that in real time for the meeting. The problem was it was really accurate. And our biggest complaint was, what do I do when it gets really bad? You're not giving me any direction. So we told them that your call is going horribly.
Here's what you're going to learn, but not how you can respond to it.
Exactly.
Okay.
So and the people are like, this is freaking me out. I don't know what to do here.
Freaking me out, in other words, I'm speaking to a collection of people who are completely checked out.
Exactly. Like if everybody had their phone out
now
here
I
right
know.
now. Yeah.
I sort of suspected that, right? But yeah, now I know.
Yep.
What do I do?
Exactly. So that's where the problem came in. And we're like, everyone's like, this is great, but I don't know what to do with it. It's like getting a car dashboard, and you've never driven a car, and now you've got a car dashboard in front of you, and you're like, what do I do? Like, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, okay.
So that told us, like, people believed the data, it was accurate, they didn't know what to do with it. And that's where we came in and we said, hey, can we summarize meetings? And there was a lot of companies that were already doing that were going into the space with OpenAI. So what we did was we said, is there anything different that we can do? And the difference that we had was, hey, I know how people reacted. So when David talked about selling candy at the elementary school as a first hustle, how did the audience react? And if the audience reacted negatively, that would adjust the way that we would actually create the summary. So it's almost like a narration layer. And so if you and I talked about the weather for about 5 minutes here and like, hey, how's Chicago? People would check out. That should not be in the summary. That is less interesting. So I'm going to move up the stuff where people were paying attention.
The weather's always
into the
shitty
summary.
in Chicago.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So it's become this sort of dashboard that you learn, okay, who's paying attention, what was decided, et cetera. Talk about how you decided to take that and turn it into a set of tools for companies to use, and how is it being used?
Yeah. So
and we'll get to how it will be used.
So we took the approach of don't go after a specific vertical. So there's Gong that does summaries. There's Otter that does transcription. There's all these people that go after very specific markets. We took the approach of, hey, we're going to go broad. We want the market to say, these are the use cases that we see for your product. And that's actually worked out really well. So 30% of our traffic is international. We have one country in Africa that has probably the top 5 country from a population standpoint. About 2% of their population now uses our solution for their meetings.
Nigeria?
No, South Africa.
Okay.
That's a good guess. That's a good guess. So what we found was like different pockets of users. So we get the salespeople that use it. We get the coaching where they want to give coaching advice. They use our solution. We get people in client services that use our solution. So there's general purpose to say, give me a summary, give me action items, give me key questions, and then automatically answer those questions and send them back to me as well as the client. And that will save anywhere from like 10 to 20% of your day for an average account manager and average salesperson. But then we got into examples where, because we made it flat to horizontal, we now have social workers that use us in state government, where they go out and they pull out their phone. One example is elder care. They go to elder care, they see the client every single week, and they record the conversation. So they'll take notes manually, but they'll record the conversation. And then they'll go back to the office, they'll upload it into their transcription service, they'll read the notes, they'll make new notes out of that, and then they'll put it into the file. That takes up about, for every 10 hours, it's about 2 hours of work that they have to do to actually do the filing. What they did was some people unofficially went in and started recording the calls, uploaded it to Read, got the output, uploaded it into the system, and they're like, okay, this just saved me 2 hours to 5 minutes, and then I make some edits based on what I think was missing. And then we started to go in and say, here's the trend across time. So as you meet with a customer, this was a common request, how have the questions changed? How has the sentiment changed? How have the action items changed? Well, you can apply that to social work. And you can see how your client has changed across time. So now they're able to actually go in and say, hey, something happened here because it was pretty consistently about 80, but the sentiment dropped down to 65 here. What's going on?
So with that example, what strikes me is, would people know these things just from observing behavior? Or are you teaching people things they're never going to see? Or is it faster, or are you just helping people see things that aren't visible otherwise?
It lets them see more.
Okay.
And by that, what I mean is, if you don't have to worry about taking notes when I'm talking with you, that I know something is going to do as good, if not a better job.
I can be more present for the conversation.
More present, and I can pick up more cues where it's like, even the audio and video won't pick up. I can pick up something that you might have said, or the way that you said it, that I'm like, and you'll say, okay, keep that in my mind.
My sarcasm is lost when you're taking notes. Okay. All right. So one of the things I find interesting about what you're doing is that and this is evolved with your latest raise, you raised $21 million, right?
$21 million about a month ago.
Okay. That's a pretty significant amount. We kind of already talked about raising money. Maybe we'll get back to that. But what you're doing, and you've kind of taken this a little bit further, is you're scooping up, vacuuming up, whatever term you want to use, all this data from transcriptions of recorded conversations, for example. That's the original data source, right?
Yep.
You've added to that all the different things people use, likely to use during the day. Email, Slack, correct me at any point.
Nope.
Am I missing something? What else is in that?
Calendars.
Okay. So all of this is kind of being pooled together into a data repository. That may be the wrong term. Yeah. Talk about how that data informs organizations as a collective, not just the voice meetings,
Yeah.
but all of this stuff. How does that inform organizations? How does AI make that better, faster, whatever? And then where can organizations take that going forward?
Yeah, I think from a remote work perspective or a hybrid approach, it makes communication so much easier, because now I don't have to go in and say, hey, Charles, what's the follow-up on that meeting? What happened in that call? All of a sudden, it's readily available. And about 90% of our meeting reports that we generate, they share with at least one other person. So it's going in and saying, I can eliminate that step out of my life of giving updates to other people. Then where we've gone with the AI is to go in and say, you've got a sales organization. That sales team now shares all the reports automatically with each other. So they can go in and actually mine and say, hey, someone asked this question. I didn't know the answer. What does that look like? And what we've done with the AI is now, if we see a question in one of your meetings, we'll follow up after the meeting and say, this is the best answer from your team. So not just going in and saying, you have to search for it. The AI is going to go in and say, hey, there's 14 answers. We have scores associated with how the client responded to those 14 answers. We're going to give you the best one and drop that in there. And that helps on onboarding. That helps a remote team actually communicate learnings incredibly fast. And that is what saves time. And that's where people are like, okay, you do this once for me, it covers the cost of a $12 or $15 subscription.
Okay. So what I thought was interesting about this, and this may be pure speculation on my part, is if I am, let's say I'm a head of HR or something like that, and I look at all of this data coming together and the fact that you can sift through it with AI and come up with all these insights, could I use it to evaluate teams, for example, to evaluate how people are performing? What are some other ways to use it that, let's be honest, maybe a little less comfortable to talk about?
I think one is you could opt out of any meeting. So let's say you have a one-on-one. Any user in the meeting can say opt out, and then we'll leave the meeting. So there's kind of a layer where it's like, okay, he starts talking about something sensitive that's off topic from the core. You can actually opt out, and that's anybody in that meeting. The second thing is you can see who you share the reports with. So it's very clear you could actually remove access to different folks.
So only the team, not with HR?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So you can limit that access on who can see what. With that said, the learnings are kind of interesting where you could get client calls. where here's a very clear example. With an agency, they have multiple touch points for the client. They have a couple of junior folks that interact with the client as well. Those junior folks might not have had a good call, and it's back to back to back, and the manager or the account director can see that and say, okay, these 3 calls were really bad. I could see it just based on the sentiment score. I read the notes. They seem to be frustrated. I looked at the video playback. This isn't good. Let me go talk with the account manager to figure out what we can do differently, and maybe I'll jump in on the call.
So it can be a tool for
more for coaching.
Performance coaching and whatever.
Yeah, more coaching than it is. Like, I don't think the policing side actually works, because if you do that one time within your organization, you're going to lose people. They're going to stop using it. They're going to turn it off. So it doesn't work for the long term.
That makes sense. Okay. Let's kind of pivot. Oh, you mentioned sales a couple times. I want to dig into that a little bit more, because that may be of some interest here. Do you see this becoming more focused on sales organizations, or could sales organizations use this to do more sort of optimization of performance, et cetera? Have you thought through like how this could be applied just to sales?
Yeah, so the 2 integrations that we get most asked for are HubSpot and Salesforce.
Okay.
And so they want to be able to take the data that we have in the meeting reports, drop that into their opportunity, automatically update that, and adjust scores based on that. We've got something in the works right now that's going to go live in about a month and a half that will do that for both of those platforms. So that's step 1. But step 2 is we measure meetings, we measure emails, we measure your Slack conversations. What we're able to do now is actually go in and say, this meeting had this deliverable where you're going to send the RFP. We could actually then go in and say, did the email get sent out with the RFP? Did the client actually respond with the RFP? So there's a very near-term future by the end of the year that you never have to update a Salesforce opportunity. Just by communicating with the client, it will auto-update on its own. And this is not the Gong or the Chorus approach where they've got some great solutions, but this is front to end. AI takes care of all of that. And that is the biggest headache of any sales leader that's here right now, where it's like, I need you to update Salesforce. I need to know what the pipeline looks like. That is the
every
worst.
time I've worked in a place where Salesforce was there, I never touched it.
Exactly.
Yeah, never touched it. And it was constant frustration,
Yeah.
you know, so I feel that. Okay, I want to sort of use the last little bit to talk more broadly about AI, you know, go figure. You said something a few minutes ago about it's more expensive to start a company now because of the dev costs, et cetera, et cetera. Now, one thing that I saw recently that really kind of captured my imagination, if nothing else, was when Sam Altman was having a conversation with Alex Haney in the... Yeah, you know what I'm about.
Yep, I know what you're talking about.
Okay. So for the audience's benefit, the conversation was about the one-person unicorn, and when are we going to have, and by that we mean one person starts a company, takes it to $1 billion valuation without taking on any employees. The enabler of that, of course, is AI. And I just have been dying to ask you what you think of that notion, and whether that 300,000 being not going very far with devs, you know, et cetera, how does that change the equation for startups?
Yeah, I would say it's very clickbaity in terms of the way that they set it up.
Okay.
Because I think you can, there will be a person that builds $1 billion company. It's a single person, but they've got
I think you said there'll be a 10-person unicorn before there's a 1-person.
Yeah.
So it's a process, but none. Okay.
But the process I think you're going to run into is if you get a 10-person or a 1-person unicorn with 10 or 1 people, what's going to happen is you have that lead early on. Maybe you get that valuation. That's not an exit. No one's going to buy a 1-person unicorn for $1 billion. Yeah. But you're going to go in and say, hey, I raised it this round. Now they can build a team to build a moat around that big opportunity. I think that's what's going to happen, because if you can build it with 1 person, no one is that smart, that great, that 1 person can keep that going.
So it's hyperbole? Billion? Okay, so it's hyperbole.
But it is
what is real?
powerful.
What is, just make it clear, what do you think is real? What you just said that you can take it to a... The other angle on this is that VC money is going to be less important in the early stages.
Yes.
You know? So what do VCs do? You know, so I don't know how you think about all that.
No, and I think there's a trend right now across VCs where if you are AI, they look at it with a high level of skepticism, because they ask, like, what is your technology underneath? How much are you actually spending on OpenAI, on Google, on the different services?
So are you just using someone else's tech?
Exactly,
Yeah.
because it's not that hard to get a
nothing
transcript.
proprietary is being built?
No.
Like you built something proprietary?
Yes.
Yeah.
So 90% of our costs are our own models.
Okay.
But I have people in the space where they actually go in and highlight, hey, do you want to transcribe this with ChatGPT 3.5, 4.0, 4.0 Turbo? And it's like, okay, at this point, you're just saying, we're just a layer.
So we're just aggregating a bunch of AI tools.
Exactly. And
Okay.
I think that's where
And
you can build
VCs
something
are seeing
quickly.
through this? Is that what you're saying?
Oh, 100%.
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's I think the early days of like, hey, I'm just going to do OpenAI plus something else, that's over. That was a year ago that you could do that. Now there's probably like 100 companies that do every single thing possible when it comes to an AI wrapper layer. And if you think you're doing something original, you're probably not at the end of the day. Now, that's not to say, like, especially in the local space, there's a lot of plays where you see this on TripAdvisor, you see this on Yelp, et cetera, where you're starting to see some AI aggregation where you can take older reviews and actually make them fresher by bringing in new content. You can pull in from the site.
So there are businesses that could be started, of course.
Yeah.
But a startup that is just using AI tools, let's say you have a unique idea,
Yep.
but you use AI to build it. And then instead of using 5 devs, you're using no-code tools or whatever it is. Is that a different notion?
No, but if you think about it, like Wix, there's a lot of like companies
Yeah.
where you can build your own website right now. Has there been a $1 billion company that came from Wix?
It's been creating an MVP of a unique idea,
Yeah.
but you just didn't use 5 devs, you used AI tools.
I think there are opportunities for that. I think they're few and far between.
Okay. And again, why?
It's going to be too easy. If you can do it with one person with no code tools, that
Why
has
is
no
Sam Altman
engineering background.
saying this then?
He's saying it because you
Just to
can't
get more
get the
people to use
valuation.
OpenAI?
That might be part of it, but I think you can build something very quickly. We've seen that over and over again. Like you can build something quickly. You can build a virtual girlfriend that goes in and talks with you that you could get, $10, $50, $100,000 coming in from a revenue perspective. You got OnlyFans models where they've actually uploaded their content and the things that they say to build a taxonomy that then goes in and combines that with OpenAI, and they're charging their subscribers X amount to have a virtual girlfriend. Like these are things that you could do today where you can make hundreds of thousands, if not millions in the short term,
Yeah.
but it's not going to go in and last very long. Like that becomes very copycatable. That becomes
So
very easy.
the easier it is to do, the easier it is to knock off.
Yes.
Okay, that seems like a universal truth, Okay, so I'm going to end with a question I like. It's a little corny, but I like to ask it. And this kind of plays off what we've just been talking about. Somebody, a 20-year-old, comes up to you and says, "I want to be an entrepreneur, a tech entrepreneur. What's the first thing I should do?" What's your advice to that 20-year-old aspiring entrepreneur?
I would say one is you don't necessarily need to go to college anymore. I think the computer science degree is still very important, but it is going to be worth less and less because it'll get more and more commoditized. It's the similar way that if you think about web developer 10, 15 years ago when that job first came out, you can make mid 6 figures, you were incredibly hot, everybody wanted to work with you. Now that has become commoditized. I think for engineering work that is more technical in nature, it's not fully commoditized, but in the next 2 to 5 years, it is going to become more of a commodity. And there's going to be something else that comes in that's really hard, that's a technical challenge. But at that point, you'll be investing time in the wrong space. And I think that's one area of concern. I think 2 is just find something you love, and you love is an extension, too hard, like.
There's that whole pursue what you love or pursue what you're good at.
Yeah, but if you want to make money, pursue what you like at least.
Okay.
That you can spend time with it, that you're not kind of over-focused on that. I think the third is don't start with AI, start with the problem. I think if you don't have a problem that you're trying to solve and you're trying to apply AI to it, that's like blockchain. No one hears blockchain anymore for like, hey, you could put your home mortgage on a blockchain. Like, why would you want to do that? Now, when the money was there, you would try to figure out a way to make this a use case. Now there's no use case at all for that. There's like, all those tokens
It's
are
just
gone.
trading,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's just gone. It's just speculative right now.
Yeah.
Versus like, I think the same thing with AI. You don't need to put AI into everything. AI doesn't need to be into everything. So you need to figure out what that problem is first. And mine was, this was before AI. I was like, hey, there's a lot of people that are in meetings that don't pay attention. Should they be in these meetings, yes or no?
Yeah.
And I think that's the same thing where you've got to start with
That
a core
old
problem.
cliche of falling in love with a problem.
Yeah.
That still holds true.
Yeah. And then I would say just don't fall in love with your idea.
Don't fall in love with your tech, fall in love with the problem you're trying to solve.
Yeah, because A little bit, but it's also like the idea is like you've got to be able to pivot. You can't say like I'm a visionary on day one. This is what I want to deliver. Placed was not the first idea that ultimately generated like 100 million in revenue. It was the third iteration. ReadAI, the first iteration wasn't the thing that actually generated the 21 million in funding.
You were always focused on a single thing you wanted to solve for.
Yes,
that never changes. That's,
exactly.
Okay. All right. I think that's as good a point as any to end this on,
Cool.
David.
All right.
Please join me in thanking David Shim.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of This Week in Local. I'm Charles Laughlin. Our producer is Dara Sweat. Today's episode featured an interview with ReadAI CEO David Shim. This interview was recorded in April on stage at Localogy's L24 conference in Arlington, Texas. You can find this show on all major podcast networks, and you can find out more at localogy.com. Please write to us at podcast@localogy.com to ask questions, recommend guests, and inquire about sponsoring this show. Also, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Your engagement helps others find us. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Localogy's This Week in Local with Mike Boland and Charles Laughlin. Be sure to subscribe for more.